How's it going, everyone? Today we are going to look at the New York City mayoral election results, the exit polls in particular, and we're going to see a lot of interesting things. Perhaps the most interesting of those things is that young women's voting patterns appear to be a mystery that cannot be explained just from them being young and from them being women. There appears to be a third factor at play, suggesting that young women might be a separate demographic category and not just the intersection of two other demographic categories, youth and female. And the data suggests as to what that other third factor may be. We're going to see some other interesting things in the data as well. But before we get into that, I just want to answer the question, why should someone care about the New York City mayoral election results if they don't live in New York? Well, there's some good reasons. New York is the largest city in the United States, which means it's the largest city in the most powerful country in the world. It is the global financial capital, and because the United Nations is situated in New York, New York is kind of the capital of the world, in a way. So what happens in New York is important even if you don't live there. So with that out of the way, let's get into the data. So first of all, the results. Zohran Mamdani won the election with 50.4% of the vote. That means that Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa did not split the vote. There was some speculation that Zohran Mamdani might win a minority of the vote but still win the election from Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa splitting the rest of the vote. Looks like that didn't happen because even if you add up Cuomo's and Sliwa's votes, you still get less than 50%, whereas Zohran Mamdani won a little bit more than 50%. There is the theory that maybe if Sliwa had quit the race, then some people would have voted for Cuomo who otherwise didn't vote for anybody because they sat out of the election because they thought, it's clear that Zohran Mamdani is going to win anyways, but we have no way to check that. Now, let's get into the exit polls. And what we're going to see in the exit polls is we're going to see a few patterns. One is that what was mentioned, young women actually are like a category of their own that is separate from just being young and being women. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to see that younger people tended to vote more for Mamdani. People who spent less time in New York tended to vote more for Mamdani, whereas older people and those who spent more time in New York preferred Andrew Cuomo. We're going to see that education-wise, those with a higher level of education tended to prefer Mamdani. But another interesting thing we're going to see is that the idea that poorer people preferred Mamdani, that's actually not in the data. What we see is not that. What we see is actually the poorest people and the richest people preferred Cuomo, whereas it's the people in between that preferred Mamdani, not the poorest people. So that's pretty interesting as well. So let's get into it, into the exit polls. Okay, so first we see the results for gender, whether it's males or females. It looks like about 50% supported Mamdani, low 40s, right? 41, 43 supported Cuomo. We don't see much difference here, right, in the behavior of males and females. What we will see is when you break it down by age, there is a difference, but only for the youth. Now we see the breakdown based on age. And we see that the younger someone is, the more they support Mamdani, and the older they are, the more they support Cuomo, the less they support Mamdani. Now, this is not surprising. Historically, younger people tend to be more comfortable with socialism than older people, and that makes sense because to younger people, it's probably more natural to feel that an authority can be trusted to take care of you. An authority like parents who take care of their children, right? So for younger people, that seems more natural to think that that's a normal way to organize society, whereas the idea that you can make money to support yourself and make all your decisions yourself and you don't need an authority helping you with that, that may be more abstract for younger people to imagine, whereas for older people, that's very easy to imagine because they deal with it every day, many of them. This chart here, age by gender, this is where the mystery appears. Okay, this is where we see that young women are a category of their own. Okay, so when you look at men, the younger they get, the more they support Mamdani. The older they get, the more they support Cuomo. No surprise there. You also see there's no difference between men of age 18 to 29 and men of age 30 to 44. For both of those categories, 67%, about 2/3, support Mamdani. Now, that is not what we see for women. For women, yes, you also see this drop in support for Mamdani, increase in support for Cuomo as women are getting older, right? As women are getting younger, right? Younger women have more support for Mamdani. But look at the category of women 18 to 29, 84%. That's huge. 84% of women 18 to 29 voted for Mamdani. Now, this cannot just be explained from them being young, because when you look at the men, yes, younger people prefer Mamdani, but once you get below 45 years old, 18 to 29 versus 30 to 44, support for Mamdani doesn't change. It stays at 67%. But for women, huge difference. Okay, 30 to 44-year-old women, 65% support for Mamdani, pretty much the same as the men. But 18 to 29-year-old women, 84% support for Mamdani. Right? When you look at 18 to 29-year-old men versus 18 to 29-year-old women, the women support Mamdani way more. 67% for men versus 84% for women. Now, why that's huge is, according to these exit polls, women 18 to 29 make up 6% of the people polled. 6% of the people polled, 84% of those supported Mamdani. Now, what is 84% of 6%? It's about 5. It's about 5%. And if they had voted for Cuomo instead, that's a 5% decrease in support for Mamdani, 5% increase in support for Cuomo, and Cuomo would have won, because the difference between how many votes they got is less than 10%. So this support cannot be explained by age. Now, could it be explained by sex? The answer is also no, because when you look at every single other age category, there's no difference between men and women. Look at 30 to 44. Men, 67%. Women, 65%. That's the same. It's 2% difference. It must be within uncertainty. Look at 45 to 64. Men, 45%. Women, 43%. Again, it's within uncertainty. In fact, if you don't care that it's within uncertainty, there's actually less support among older women for Mamdani. Let's look at 65 plus. Men, 37%, women, 36%. Pretty much the same. When you look at every single other age group, there's no difference between men and women. It's only for 18 to 29 where you see this huge difference, where there's so much more support from young women. So this 84%, it can't just be explained by, well, they are women and they are young. No, every other age group, no difference between men and women. Okay? And when you look at people of the same age, young women support Mamdani way more than the men. So what is going on here? What is the third factor at play other than age and sex? Well, later on in the day, we are going to see what that might be. So let's keep going. So now we have what best describes your education. We see that those with a higher level degree tend to support Mamdani more. Those with a lower level, highest degree, tend to support Cuomo more and tend to support Sliwa more as well. We see the education breakdown in looking at different details, but the pattern is always the same, that those with a higher level education tend to have more support for Mamdani. Breakdown by political party, no surprise here. Democrats supported Mamdani more, although about 1/3 of them supported Cuomo. Republicans overwhelmingly supported Cuomo, not Sliwa, who's the Republican candidate. So that's interesting, which implies that there was perhaps a lot of strategic voting going on. Republicans voting not for the Republican, but for the independent former Democrat Cuomo, probably in hopes of defeating Mamdani. But that kind of strategic voting did not work because Mamdani did get a little bit more than 50% of the vote. Among independents, we actually see a little bit more percent supporting Cuomo, 46 versus 43. Clear majority actually are against Mamdani, right? They are for Cuomo and Sliwa among independents. But independents make up only 26% of those polled, whereas Democrats made up 60%. It is New York after all. Then we have the breakdown of sex by party. So when we look at Democratic men versus Democratic women, women actually have less support for Mamdani, okay, than the men do. Republican men, Republican women, same thing. Women actually have less support for Mamdani. Women tend to prefer Cuomo, okay, more than the men do. And we see that with both Democrats and Republicans and with independents, okay, even though it's very close with an uncertainty, right? Independent men, 44% for Mamdani, 44% for Cuomo. Independent women, 42% for Mamdani, 48% for Cuomo. Okay, so women actually tend to have a slight preference that is more pro-Cuomo than the men when you break it down by party, which draws even more emphasis as to what is going on with young women being so pro-Mamdani. And we're going to see what that might be. Okay, then we have total family income. And this is very interesting, right? Because there's this idea that, well, poor people preferred Mamdani and rich people preferred Cuomo. That's actually not what we see. What we see is the poorest and the richest preferred Cuomo, and those in between preferred Mamdani. Okay, so for those with total family income under $30,000, we have 48% preferring Cuomo, 8% Sliwa, and only 42% preferring Mamdani. So the clear preference here is for Cuomo for the poorest demographic here. Then we see from 30,000 all the way up to 300,000, we see a preference for Mamdani. But then the richest category, 300,000 and above, we again see a clear preference for Cuomo. So the poorest and the richest prefer Cuomo. Those in the middle, that's who prefers Mamdani. Now we have how long have you lived in New York? And we see a clear trend here. Okay, the longer someone's lived in New York, the more they prefer Cuomo. The less someone's lived in New York, the more they prefer Mamdani. Okay, for those who've been in New York for less than 5 years, 85% Mamdani support. 5 to 10 years, 78%. 10 or more years, but you were not born in New York, 55%. And for those who were born in New York, only 38% prefer Mamdani, with the clear winner being Cuomo with 49% of the vote. Support for Sliwa also increases for those who were in New York longer. What could explain this? Well, part of it is actually probably overlapping with age. Those who've been in New York less time probably arrived more recently to start their education or to start their career. So those would be younger people, right? Those who are in New York less are also probably more likely to be younger. You also have the fact that Mamdani describes himself as a socialist. Now here we're not talking about how long you've been in the United States. We're talking about how long you've been in New York. But there would be some correlation between how long someone's been in New York and how long someone's been in the United States, because someone who's been in the United States less would have also been in New York less. If we assume that capitalism is a part of American culture, then those who have been in the United States more, who are probably overrepresented among those who have been in New York more, well, they may feel more strongly in favor of capitalism and against socialism, and that could be affecting this data as well. Now, here we have the data on parents, and this is what answers our mystery about young women right here in front of us. Do you have children under 18? For those who said yes, we have a tie, 46% versus 47%, Cuomo versus Mamdani. And those who answered no, we have a clear preference for Mamdani, 53% Mamdani and 39% Cuomo. But the real answer to our mystery comes here when we break it down based on male and female. Men with children, 50% support Mamdani, 42% support Cuomo. Men with no children, 49% support Mamdani, 41% support Cuomo. There's no difference. This is a statistical tie. Okay? Whether a man has children or doesn't have children, his support for Mamdani is 50%, 49%. It's the same. His support for Cuomo, 42%, 41%. It's the same. For men, whether they have children or not, it doesn't affect their voting patterns, at least with this election. But look at what's going on with women. Women with children, 43% support Mamdani, 51% support Cuomo. Cuomo is clearly ahead among women with children. Women with no children, 56% support Mamdani, 39% support Cuomo. Mamdani is clearly ahead when you're looking at women with no children. Okay? Now, this becomes even more clear when you look at the pro-Mamdani versus anti-Mamdani vote. Okay? Women with children, 43% pro-Mamdani, which means 57% are anti-Mamdani. But women with no children, 56% pro-Mamdani. Okay? It's just a mirror image with 44% being anti-Mamdani. Okay? And that is a big change. Okay? From 43% Mamdani, women with children, to 56% Mamdani, women with no children. That is a jump of 13%. That is a huge jump. Look what's going on with Cuomo. 51% support Cuomo. That's a majority, by the way, among women with children. And that drops down to 39% supporting Cuomo among women with no children. Okay? And that is a difference of 12%. This is a huge difference. Okay? We see a major difference how women vote in this election based on whether they have children or not. No difference for the men. Big difference for the women. And that right there could explain what the third factor is, which is making young women vote so differently from others who are young or others who are women. Let's just go back to that chart briefly. There we go. Age by gender. Women 18 to 29, among that age category, you probably have a significant overrepresentation of women who have no children because they're younger. As you get into older categories of women, you're probably going to see more and more children there. So that is the third factor here. This isn't just the intersection of female and young, okay? This is the intersection of three categories, okay? Female, young, and without children, okay? Because for men with children, with no children, doesn't affect how they vote. But women without children, they are clearly more pro-Mamdani. Women with children are clearly pro-Cuomo. So that is the third factor here, which suggests that women with children and women without children maybe should be viewed as two separate demographic categories. Now, maybe that's the case for men as well. Maybe for all polls, instead of looking at male and female, they should specify as well male with children, male without children, female with children, female without children. But at least what we see from this poll is that for the men, having children makes no difference in how they vote. Whereas for the women, having children makes a big difference. And that could be the answer right there. Okay? That it's not about men versus women, because when you look at any other age category, the men and women are voting the same. Okay? You have to specify, is it women with children or women without children? And look at this. Women with children actually prefer Cuomo more than men. Okay? Men's preference for Cuomo, 42%. Women with children, their preference for Cuomo, 51%. You have to look at women with children versus women without children as two different categories. And that is very interesting. Two different statistical categories behaving differently. That reveals our mystery perhaps right there. Now in this data, When we see women with children or women with no children, it's all the age groups lumped together. It doesn't break it down by age. If we really want to know if it answers our mystery, if the no children status really explains why women of the youngest age group tend to be so much more pro-Mamdani, to know that, we'd actually have to see the breakdown of women with children versus women with no children, see that breakdown by age group. And we don't see that in this data, so we can't know for sure, but it really does seem to be that the children versus no children status could be that third factor that answers our mystery. Okay, let's look at the rest of the data here. So, is this your first time that you have ever voted in an election for mayor? Those who say yes, overwhelming support for Mamdani. Those who say no, slight support for Mamdani, but very close to a tie, 47% versus 44% for Cuomo. And this correlates with youth, right? Younger people are less likely to have voted in a previous election. It also correlates with how much time someone spent in New York, right? People who haven't been in New York as much, well, they're less likely to have voted in an election for mayor in New York. Although the question here doesn't specify New York, but maybe that's how people interpreted the question. Do you own or rent the place you currently live in? Owners clearly support Cuomo. Renters clearly support Mamdani. This also correlates with age, right? Younger people are more likely to be renting. Older people are more likely to be owning. Now, this is interesting. Do you think the condition of New York's economy is? For those who say good, they prefer Mamdani. For those who say not so good, you have less preference for Mamdani, although Mamdani is still above Cuomo. And for those who say poor, it's actually a tie between Cuomo and Mamdani, and only 42% support Mamdani. And 15% actually support Sliwa. So support for Cuomo and support for Sliwa actually increases among those who think the economic conditions are poor. Support for Mamdani is higher among those who think the economic conditions are good. Okay, again, this counters the idea that you have, poor people who think the economy is really bad, voting for Mamdani. That's not what's happening. The opposite is happening. People who think the economy is better are voting for Mamdani. People who think the economy is worse, they're voting for Cuomo and Sliwa. And in Canada, we actually see the same pattern, that those who are more concerned about the economy, they tend to vote more right-wing. There you go. What best describes your family situation? Getting ahead, holding steady versus falling behind. Those who say falling behind are more pro-Mamdani. Those who say getting ahead are more pro-Cuomo. And holding steady is in between, right? Now, how do you explain that combined with the previous data here, which is saying that people who think the economy is good tend to be more pro-Mamdani, people who think the economy is bad tend to be more pro-Cuomo, pro-Sliwa? Well, just combine it. Those who are voting for Mamdani are the ones who believe the economy is good, but I'm falling behind in this good economy. So it's people who are looking at others and thinking, well, they're doing so good, why am I not doing so good? Guess what? That falls perfectly in line with socialist ideology. It makes perfect sense. It's not paradoxical. Meanwhile, who's voting for Cuomo or Sliwa? Those who are saying, well, the economy is poor, but I'm getting ahead. I'm doing what I can to get ahead in this poor economy, right? So that's a mindset of, I am an individual struggling against a difficult situation, but as an individual, I'm getting ahead, right? That's more of a free market mentality, more of a I'm an individual getting ahead rather than the government needs to take care of me kind of mentality. Okay, next. Was one reason for your vote for mayor today to support Donald Trump, to oppose Donald Trump, or Donald Trump was not a factor? So for 58% of people who responded, Donald Trump was not a factor. And for those for whom Donald Trump was not a factor, you actually have only 41% for Mamdani and 49% for Cuomo. Cuomo is clearly the winner, and 9% for Sliwa. But you do have a substantial portion of the population for whom Donald Trump was a factor. Those who voted to support Donald Trump, that's interesting, 72% support Cuomo, right? Although you do have 23% support Sliwa as well. So why so much for Cuomo, even though he's not a Republican? looks like it could be strategic voting. It could be Trump's words in support of Cuomo as well. Those who voted to oppose Donald Trump, 77% for Mamdani. That's not surprising. Okay, how do you feel about the way Donald Trump is handling his job as president? Again, nothing surprising here. Those who disapprove of Trump more support Mamdani more. Those who approve of Trump more support Cuomo and Sliwa more. Do you consider yourself a democratic socialist? Of course, those who say yes overwhelmingly support Mamdani. What's interesting is that's 24% of the people polled. That's pretty huge, right? In the capital of the capitalist world, 24% of voters describe themselves as socialist. That's a pretty interesting and surprising statistic. Those who do not describe themselves as democratic socialist, well, you still have some support for Mamdani, about a third, right? So they're voting for him because he's a Democrat, right? But clear majority voted for Cuomo, and more people for Sliwa as well. Then we have, which one of these 5 issues is the most important facing the city? So for those who say cost of living, 66% prefer Mamdani, clear majority. But for those who say immigration and crime, you have 58% and 67% supporting Cuomo, clear support for Cuomo. Okay, now this is interesting. Consider the other economic data we looked at. Cost of living, if that's what people are concerned about the most, they are more pro-Mamdani. But what we saw above is that pro-Mamdani people are actually more likely to think that the economy is doing well. There's the data right there. Do you think the condition of New York's economy is good? More people are pro-Mamdani, right? So they think the condition of the economy is good, but they feel they're falling behind, and so they believe cost of living is a big issue. Not because the economy is doing poorly. No, they think the economy is doing well. But they consider cost of living is an issue is because they are falling behind in that good economy. Is crime where you live a major problem, minor problem, not a problem? Okay, so those who say not a problem tend to be more pro-Mamdani. Those who say a major problem tend to be more pro-Cuomo. Now again, this correlates with the idea that there is more crime in the poorest neighborhoods, because what we saw before is that the poorest households actually prefer Cuomo more. Okay, so when did you decide who to vote for? We actually see an interesting trend here where the earlier someone decided, the more pro-Mamdani they are. The later someone decided, the more pro-Cuomo they are. So this could be because you have people changing their mind, right? You could have had Republicans who decided later on to vote strategically for Cuomo instead of Sliwa, and they decided that later on, closer to the election day. You could have also had Democrats who were undecided whether to, or left-leaning people who were undecided whether to go for Mamdani or Cuomo, and it looks like those undecided voters swayed more towards Cuomo, right? Because those who made the decision more recently were more pro-Cuomo. Also, we saw that independents had more of a preference for Cuomo, and so it's maybe the independents also made their decision later on, right? And we see that effect here as well. Now, you've known all along who you're going to vote for. That's interesting. So maybe that's just Democrats who vote Democrat the whole time. So they've known all along, 52% of them, that they're going to vote for Mamdani. So I hope you found that interesting, some interesting insights there. And until next time.